Well, hello there, welcome back. Today I'm here to wrap up the month of July because why the fuck not? Listen, we are all gonna collectively ignore the fact that it is currently the beginning of September and I'm just now posting my July wrap up. During the month of July, I read 7 books in total. 2 of them were for book clubs and 1 of them was a budget read, and the rest were just mood reads as per usual, because apparently that's the kind of person I am. The first one was the budget read, which was Girl Life Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, and this book was just so fucking good. In this, we follow Chloe Brown, who just recently went through a near-death experience of sorts. She was nearly run over by a truck, and after that, she makes a list, basically to get alive, Chloe Brown. Oh my god. Okay. She makes a list of things that she has to do in order to get alive, and the first of them is to move from her parents' house. And so she does so, she goes to this flat. In this building lives and works this guy called Redford Morgan, and he is just such a softie, he's got such a soft heart. And basically he and Chloe hate each other's guts. It's the story of the two of them kind of, growing on each other and slowly falling in love with each other while at the same time completing Chloe's list. What can I say about this book? I loved it so much. I loved it so much, and it completely caught me by surprise because I was just expecting like light reading, something to spend the time and to have fun reading with my friend Juno, and it ended up being so much more. It was so good. Both Chloe and Red are such amazing characters. Chloe is this very cynical woman and she is very dedicated to her job, but she is also very close to her family, and her family was one of my favorite parts of the book. The dynamics of the family and how close they were to each other and how they loved each other and how they acted, when they were together and all that. Her grandmother, amazing. But yeah, Chloe is pretty much intent on never falling in love again after she had a bad experience in a previous relationship. Red is just a softie, he's got a huge heart, and he has his own reasons for being cautious and suspicious of rich people. And one thing that I really appreciated about this book was that, one, we got to see someone healing from an abusive relationship and, the effects that this type of situation has on a person even after the relationship is broken up, but also that the person going through that is a man, which I don't think we see enough stories about men healing from abusive relationships. So that was something that I really appreciated and something that I thought was handled very in a very sensible manner. Sensible? Yeah, I think that's the word. It was handled in a very sensible manner. It was handled beautifully. And I just really appreciated reading about it. Chloe is a fat black woman and she deals with fibromyalgia, I think is how you say it. She has a chronic illness and the rep for that is on Voices. I really liked reading about it as someone who goes through chronic pain. And all of these more sensitive topics that were touched upon in this book were handled with such care, and the writing in this was just spectacular. Both characters had such distinct voices and it was just so funny. This book was so funny. There were moments I laughed out loud. We really got to see the progression of Chloe and Red's relationship, and it was just so realistic, and I loved seeing them both like growing on each other and them slowly falling in love every step of the way, and they were just adorable. And not only that, the smut was impeccable, and I loved how they talked about things and communicated. That was so good. And on the few instances where miscommunication happened, they always ended up talking about things and setting things straight afterwards and explaining what had actually happened. And I just really appreciated it. In the end, this was just too fucking good, and I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Siege and Storm by Lee Bardugo, and this was the peak of the Grisha trilogy for me. This is the second book, so I can't really talk much about it, because it will be spoilers. But basically, this trilogy follows this girl called Alina Starkov, and she lives in this world called Ravka, where there is this stretch of land that is covered in darkness and populated with monsters that is called the Shadowfold. And surprise, surprise, Alina can summon and control light. So she might be the country's best hope of getting rid of this Shadowfold. I thought this was such an improvement from the first book, not only in regards to Lee Bardugo's writing, but also in regards to the arcs of the characters and how they grew and evolved in this particular book. We see Alina being more ambitious and standing her ground and standing up for herself and also demanding things for herself. And we see her falling more and more in love with her power and, longing to use it and wanting to learn more about it and how to use it better. And I really appreciated seeing how not only she wanted to get to the full potential of her Grisha powers, but also how she wanted a bit more political power and how she was learning to play the game better with Nikolai and all that. Secondary characters got some added layers of complexity, and we were also introduced to some new characters. Amongst them, my king, Nikolai Lantsov. Nikolai is bi. I just know it. You cannot convince me otherwise. I don't make the rules. I am just stating a fact. Nikolai is such a great character, and he is such a great addition to the series, and he just falls into this very specific type of character that I absolutely love, which is the charming, flirty, cocky bastard. Like, if you have a cocky character who flirts with everyone, it is guaranteed that I'm gonna fall in love with them. I am sold. But one thing that I really didn't expect to love as much as I did in this book was the changes that Mal and Alina as a couple went through, how the perceptions that they had of each other changed and how they navigated these changes. I thought the evolution of them both together was so interesting. I don't ship this couple, by the way. I kind of hate them with all my heart as a couple, but I thought this whole trajectory that they made in this book made so much sense, and it was handled in a way that I could really understand what was going on in the characters' minds. And the finale of this book is absolutely epic. Like, it was just so fucking good. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Clap When You Land by Elisabetta Azevedo, and I absolutely loved it. I listened to the audiobook while I read along with the ebook, and I really recommend that experience. I think reading the book this way really heightened my enjoyment of it. This follows two girls, one from the United States and one from the Dominican Republic, and they both have a father who died in the same plane crash. This book talks about so many things, and if you told me that a book was talking about all of these topics at the same time, I would say, okay, so there's absolutely no way that it handled all of them well, right? This book handled all of them well. Oh my god. Grief, cultural differences, racism, sexism, homophobia, sexual harassment, sexual assault, sex trafficking, poverty, so many things, and it deals so well with all of them. Teen pregnancy as well, and traumatic labor as well, and it is just so sensible. I was very hesitant to read this because I really don't like poetry. Poetry scares me. I never understand what's going on, and so I was very scared of reading this book. I thought I was not going to like it. I thought I was not going to understand it, and it would just make me feel stupid. But Jocelyn from Jocelyn Reads recommended that I listen to the audiobook while I read along, and oh my god, that was such good advice. Elisabetta Azevedo's writing is just so fucking beautiful, but it is not beautiful in a way that makes it harder to be understood. It's still very accessible, and I was just so awestruck, really, and I really loved it. I think that even if I had not listened to the audiobook, if I had only read the book, I would still have loved it, and I would still have thought that it was beautiful, that the writing was beautiful. But the audiobook just takes it to a whole other level. I loved both main characters and their respective communities and families, but I think I especially loved Camino's aunt. But one specific theme that I was just very thankful to see in this book was the theme of growing up and finding out that the people that you love and that you looked up to are actually just people, and they make mistakes, and sometimes they do awful things, and how heartbreaking it is to come to terms with the fact that this person who does these awful things is also this amazing person that I've been loving my whole life and looking up to my whole life. And it was particularly interesting to watch them trying to understand how these two people were the same, could be the same, while at the same time grieving that person. So it was just so intriguing, really. At the end of the day, I just really loved this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Roan and Rising by Liba Dugo. This is the third and final book in the Grisha trilogy. I have an entire vlog dedicated to it, the spoilers in this one, but I also have a spoiler-free review of the entire trilogy, so I'm gonna link both of those down below. For me, this really was wasted potential, the novel. Like, Liba Dugo had the knife and the cheese in her hands, and she still managed to fuck up. Is that a saying in English as well? The knife and the cheese in her hands? I don't think it is. We have an exciting beginning, some good discussions. The whole first part of the book was great, you know, the first half. I would say from the second half to the end, it's just downhill, you know. And the ending being the lowest of the low, in my opinion. I really didn't like the ending of this book, especially considering that it is the end of the series. In this, we also find out a bit more about the background and the history of certain characters, which I really liked. And Alina is still, you know, ambitious, and she is starting to realize the weight of her power a lot more in this one as well, which I also really liked. This was the Darklina I wanted all along. Whenever the Darkling and Alina interacted in this book, I was 100% there for it, you know. I absolutely loved them both in this. All of their interactions were just so interesting to read, and the power play. Yes, in the end, I mostly enjoyed this book. I thought it had great potential, you know, the setup was there, but Liba Dugo fucked it up, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Beckhammanuel Antirracista by Jamila Ribeiro. This is a Brazilian non-fiction book about racism, and I mean, the title literally translates to Little Anti-Racist Handbook, so that's basically what it is. It's basically an introduction into what is racism in Brazil, what does it look like, how does it work, and how can you be an anti-racist. This is a very short book, and it really is just an introduction to anti-racism, but the writing is very accessible, and I do think that it is a good introduction. So I don't rate non-fiction, but I really like this one. Then I read Zami, A New Spelling of My Name by Audre Lorde, and this is basically her memoir about the women that she loved in her life. She calls this a mythography, I think, which is basically her way of saying that memory has its limitations, you know, it's not as reliable as we like to think it is. So she might be remembering certain things wrong, and she can only speak from her memory and from her experience, you know, so she is writing as she remembers, but she is fully aware that the way she remembers might not be the reality. So Audre Lorde just embraces the limitations of memory and decides that she is going to write things as she remembers, regardless of whether or not they are correct. So the book basically mixes real events with the myths of memory. The word is very hard for me. Myths of memory. And you don't really know which details are real and which of them are made up by Audre's memory. And I just thought it was very interesting. You know, I really loved how she embraced it. This was the July pick for the Perfectly Queer Book Club, which is hosted by Lily and Molly. I'm gonna leave the channel links down below. And as I said before, this is basically Audrey's memories of the women that she loved, from her mothers to her friends and her lovers. This again tackles so many topics: racism, sexism, homophobia, intersectionality, mental health, abortion, illegal abortion, compulsory heterosexuality, sexual assault, body shaming, so many things. I could just spend an entire day listing all of the relevant topics that were talked about in this book. It was very relevant and strong and impactful, and it was a bit sad to realize that many of the things that used to happen to Audrey back in the day still happen to this day. So that's a bit discouraging, but it's also very important for us to know. So the writing was really beautiful and sometimes very lyrical, and it even went to the point of integrating some of her poetry into the book. But I particularly liked reading about intersectionality in this, and how Audrey had a very hard time, a very difficult time finding a place for herself, being a fat, black, queer woman, and how in the lesbian spaces people thought they were above racism, you know, that they were incapable of committing racism, and they didn't really talk about it, and how it made them different, you know, white lesbian women from black lesbian women. And also in the black spaces, you know, it was hard for her to find other lesbian black women. And so it was quite interesting to see all of those intersectionalities and, you know, her struggle to find a space for herself. My favorite sections were the ones about Jen, the abortion, Eudora, and Muriel. Those were so hard-hitting, and yeah, they were heartbreaking, but also I really loved reading about them. And before going into this book, definitely check the trigger warnings, please. And in the end, because this was, as I said before, a mythomythography, I felt comfortable enough assigning it a rating, and so I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read in the month of July was The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This was the July pick for the Unfriendly Black Hotties book club, and I'm gonna link it down below as well. And I really liked it. This is about two sisters, two black sisters, but they are both white passing, and they came from this town that basically had this very eugenic mentality of trying to get less black each generation. The two sisters, Stella and Desiree, run away from this town, and eventually one of them lives life as a black woman and the other lives life as a white woman, and it follows both of them and the daughters. So this is basically an intergenerational book. All of the characters were complex, and I really loved how the author was not afraid of making them extremely flawed. This talks about colorism and intergenerational trauma, and how family problems that you bury without acknowledging and coming to terms with basically come back to bite you in the ass. This last thing was particularly interesting to me because my mother, she's a psychologist, and she works with this thing. I don't really know what it is called in English, but the translation would be familiar constellation. It is an area of psychology that basically talks about intergenerational trauma, intergenerational anything really, and how families end up repeating cycles and repeating things that happened in the past, and how issues that were buried without being properly solved or dealt with end up coming back to haunt you. And I think this was particularly evident in this book with the fact that both the daughters of both of the sisters were really much alike the sister. No, I didn't explain that right. Like, Desiree's daughter was very much alike Stella, and Stella's daughter was very much alike Desiree. I also really adored Reese, who is Jude's boyfriend. Jude is Desiree's daughter. Reese is a trans man, and I believe this timeline takes place in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 80s. So it was very much interesting reading about how the world was for Reese. And Reese and Jude's relationship was also really good to read about, you know. They had a very healthy relationship mostly, and I just loved reading about them. I ended up giving this book a 4 out of 5 stars because I found the pacing to be a bit choppy, but other than that, it was an incredible read. So that's it. Those were the books that I read during the month of July, and it is very good to finally wrap them up. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like, comment and subscribe if you feel like it, and as always, I'll see you around.